Games. Board games. We might be talking about what drives us and gives us ambition, but we're not gonna shout. Here is the person known as Phil Walker Harding, and today we'll be talking and playing about how an evergreen came to make it possible to be a full-time designer like a cake. I don't know why I said cake, but maybe you want to eat. Maybe I'm hungry, or maybe I just like smelly feet. I don't actually like smelly feet. I do apologize for my terrible rhymes, but good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. It's 10 a.m.-ish UK time, which means that it's time for Busy Beats and Board Game Bladder, episode 983, and I'm meeting Phil Walker Harding. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, I didn't know you did your own theme song. I didn't know it was ad-libbed like that. So quite the intro.
Well, I mean, at the start, so this show started during the pandemic, and there were definitely some episodes where I would sort of practice in the shower and then do it. But then, if I'm being honest, like I've been a bit less affair with the theme song, and if I do a terrible rhyme, that's okay. I mean, it's part of the embracing that first terrible prototype. So people see my first terrible prototypes all the time at the start of the show.
I like it. I like it.
But what kind of person are you, Phil? I mean, people, as you said in your bio, people probably know you best for Sushi Go, which has sold millions at this point. Are you allowed to say how many million exactly, or?
I think it's getting close to 2 now.
Nice.
So, a bit, somewhere between 1 and 2. But yeah, it's been amazing.
Up closer to 2.
I think so, yeah. I haven't added it up recently.
Do they not give you an updated number where it's, hey, this is what we've sold last year, and this is the number that we've sold cumulatively total?
No, most of my royalty reports that I get don't have an all-time number.
Oh,
so if I want to know that, it takes one extra step. So
you have to actually do the arithmetic yourself. I mean, I get.
Well, I suppose I could ask Gamewright, and they would probably know, but it's one of those things I don't know, you don't want to focus too much on sales figures. I think it's really easy to get a bit sucked into like
one thing,
monitoring them too closely. I think you could go crazy if you did that too much. So,
I mean, do you ever feel, I mean, it isn't your only success. I mean, by any other measure, Baron Park is like an amazing success. I mean, my Shelfie, one of your recent co-designs with Matthew Dunstan, is like looking like it's about to do really well. And these are I mean, you've done multiple games that any designer would be happy to have, I think. But do you ever feel a bit of resentment, or, oh, I wish that people would focus more on my newer stuff since Sushi Go?
I wouldn't say resentment, but it is interesting when you mostly get known for one thing. So certainly that's how, when I meet people in the industry, I'm usually introduced as, oh, this is the Sushi Go guy. So yeah, it is interesting. I suppose I'm happy with Sushi Go as a game, so I don't mind being associated with it. But I suppose there is that funny thing you get where it's like, when you become well known for one thing, there's this weird pressure you put on yourself to have another thing that big, or to have another thing that lives up to that, and not just be known for something that's quite a few years old. So that's a weird pressure I sometimes realize I'm putting on myself. But for the most part, I'm really happy with Sushi Go's success, so I don't mind.
I mean, there are so many designers who fall into the same ballpark. I mean, I don't mean to compare I mean, I think you've enjoyed a lot more success and you've been a lot more productive than I have. But, Yogi's done reasonably well in that it has become, I guess, an evergreen, although it's not selling as much, but it is continuing to sell year after year. And it is something where this allowed me to make all these later games. And whilst I'm working hard on getting more stuff to publishers that will hopefully turn into another evergreen, fingers crossed, at a certain point, like after I self-published the L deck, and then I realized, wow, this is so much more difficult to sell at conventions because Yogi, obviously, people are looking at it. And there was my thing of, well, it's entirely possible that I might never make as financially a successful game ever as this one. But I would, I mean, I hope that it'll grow or that I'll have even bigger financial success cumulatively at least, and that it'll become a smaller percentage of my total earnings. But I really hope that people continue to enjoy it. And the truth is, for me, every time that I see someone saying, hey, I really love this game and I use it as an icebreaker at my work too, I'm like, wow, people are really enjoying it. It's not just, and that makes it all the more real because there's a slight separation when you don't publish something yourself, when you don't take it to conventions. I mean, sure, I still take Yogi to conventions, and sometimes it's like, yeah, people are enjoying it, but there's still a little bit of separation between me and that number. Do you relate to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be very rare for any designer to have multiple, evergreen hits. Like it's pretty rare to get one. So
Mm-mm.
I think for people like, Matt Leacock and Pandemic is another good example where he's got so many
Alan
great
Moon and
games.
Ticket to Ride.
But Alan Moon and Ticket to Ride, yep. But they become known for that one game, which is just the most visible. And no, I definitely relate to that. And I think you've got to be really appreciative and thankful when one game does cross over like that, because it opens up so many doors. And there is an element of chance and just good fortune in a game becoming an evergreen. Like obviously it's got to be a good game, but those games that cross over and become constant sellers, there's a little bit of luck. So when it happens, I just think you've got to embrace it and be thankful for it. And so that's why I try not to get too fed up with Sushi Go stuff, because it's allowed me to do so much more. So,
I mean, I
yeah.
said that slightly flippantly. I mean, do you think you could ever get fed up with Sushi Go stuff? I mean, does it still spark joy in your heart if someone says, hey, I really love Sushi Go and I'm enjoying it with my family?
Oh, totally. Yeah, it really does. I think especially because it's in lots of places around the world. So, seeing photos of people playing it in different languages, in different countries, in places I've never visited, that's very inspiring to me still. Because, one of my big goals in game design is to create a game that becomes a bit of a classic that, maybe even exists beyond my lifetime. I think that would be incredible. And so when I see Sushi Go kind of taking some of those steps, I feel really gratified. So no, I'm not sick of it at all in that sense. I'm a little sick of playing it, I'll admit, but I'm not sick of seeing other people play it.
I mean,
Yeah.
have you actually, you know what? I'm going to leave the Sushi Go chat to the side for just a minute. I would like you to say what else would you like people to know about yourself? I mean, of course, they can check out your website and all the other games, but if someone was like, hey, who is Phil Walker Harding? What would you like them to know? What kind of person are you? Not just in terms of what games have you made, but what kind of person are you?
Wow. I guess I could tell you some of the things I've done in my life and some of the things that I'm passionate about. So I guess I think of myself, I know this sounds incredibly lame because a lot of people just throw this word around, but I do think of myself as a creative person. And the reason I say that is because ever since I was very young, I've always made things. So not long after I learned to read, I wanted to write books. Not long after I first played board games, I wanted to make board games. When I got into music, I wanted to be in a band. When I got into films, I wanted to make movies. I've just always had that creative thing, which I think a lot of game designers can relate to. And so, I studied film at university.
Wow.
And I've also, I've been in bands and made music. And so I guess I think of myself, it's only the last few years, I think I've become really comfortable with thinking of myself as a full-time board game designer, because I think previous to that, I just thought of myself as like, oh, I'm this person who is creative and makes different stuff. And in whatever area I'm interested in, I like to, create in that area. So that's probably a big thing about me.
So did you also, I mean, you mentioned that you went to study filmmaking at university and you were part of a band. I would like to touch upon that later as like what kind of music you made and like also, but did you actually write any books?
No. I never wrote any. So when I was really young, when I was like, say, I think 6, 7, 8, 9, I wanted to be an author when I grew up. So I wanted to write fiction books. And so I wrote, the main thing I did at school at that time was creative writing, and I loved to just write stories. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. I think high school kind of beat that out of me in a way, because I just did not enjoy kind of the English curriculum in my high school. And I just learned to stop. I basically stopped reading and became less and less interested in reading, to the point where that kind of spark went away and sort of got replaced with movies. So I think my interest in being an author turned into wanting to make films. Yeah.
It seems like such a massive shame for a passion like that to be destroyed by the educational system. But I think I totally relate. I mean, I hated illustration and drawing when I was younger at school. It was very much, okay, draw this thing. And yeah, I was bad at doing homework in a timely manner. But then when like finally it was like, okay, this one piece of, I think it was like a shoe or something, and then I spent hours and hours on it, and I thought, oh, this is hopefully something that will finally get me praise. And the guideline was meant to be that spend about an hour on it. And then when I brought it in, and the teacher said, you see what you can do when you spend half an hour on it? And for me, that like crushed me, and I was like, wow, I'll never and that, in retrospect, like that's a really bad thing to say to a child, like, because you don't know how long they spent. And so if it's much better, sure, they might have spent half an hour on that and spent 20 minutes on the previous things. Conversely, it might have been that they spent hours and hours and are just hoping for a tiny bit of, what, this actually looks really good. I can tell a difference, that it's so much better than all your previous things. Well done. If they'd said that, I would have actually been encouraged. But yeah, it took me several years until I started being able to do it and show it to other people. And now I think, like, talking about it, I still have that sense of constantly, is this good enough? Am I good enough? And then I share it on Twitter, hoping for some quick instant feedback, or sharing it on a couple of Facebook Messenger groups I'm part of, saying, genuinely, please praise me, because I need it. I mean,
oh no, I think it is so easy to encourage a child and also completely discourage a child. Like, I think many of us would have stories like that, where one sentence some adult said to us just crushed us, because you're just so impressionable, and if you're a sensitive kid, you just really need some verbal encouragement sometimes. And if someone says the wrong thing, it can just have a massive impact. No, I totally relate to that. And yeah, I also think school has a way of it's hard for a teacher to treat every child as the individual that they are, because time, and you've got a whole class of kids, and so you end up funneling them through kind of a bit of a system. And when it comes to things like art and literature, I found it very easy to just get disinterested, because I wasn't being shown the stuff that I was passionate about. I wasn't being shown, given the opportunity to explore the books I wanted to read, or in art, explore the art I found really cool. So yeah, I think, but I mean, I don't know the solution to that, but I just think a lot of us have probably left some of our passions behind when we were younger. And, one great thing about adulthood is you can, like, as you said, you can rediscover them a bit, and you can say, hey, maybe I do like drawing, and maybe I'll just give it a
Absolutely.
go without
I mean, I'm
without
still on that journey, and
being
honestly, it's
rated.
been slightly cathartic just kind of sharing that with you. So thank you for being my
Oh,
unpaid therapist.
oh,
But let's
my
take a
pleasure.
step back and talk about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. So yesterday, for people who aren't aware, I went to Dicini. I was at my friend Josie's place, and there were cats. We drove along from Ipswich to, yeah, I've said that now, to Norwich, which is where Dicini is. It's this kind of cross between a market and a convention, I would say. So that's me in the car. And the lovely thing is that there's people of every demographic. I mean, I don't mean to be ageist. I hope this isn't being ageist, but just to observe that at UK Games Expo, there's not that many older people. And at most conventions that I've been to, there's not that many people outside the smaller demographic of these are the people who can afford to go in. And it is typically more men than women in a, typical convention. But actually, when I go to Dicini, I see people of all different genders. Why is that not clicking? And there's all different demographics, and people come together, and they've got, it's a bit more again than a market stall, because they do have lots of tables where they're doing their own demos as a club. So it's a club that says, hey, we're going to really share the joy of gaming. But for me, I mean, people like here, Nicoletta and Elena, I mean, maybe, and at the end of the day, Holly and her friends, like, they are people who might never bother to go to a normal convention, but because, hey, it's free, we'll go in, and then if we don't like it, we can step out after half an hour. It allows everyone to have that joy and just to see what gaming is all about, and then maybe wander off with a little bit more of a smile on their face. And then, I mean, obviously, I played lots and lots of games by myself, and we also had a vegan dinner before I said goodbye. And I did have a small disaster, which I'm a bit annoyed by. I might need to sort it out, because two of my banners, which you'll see Jess carrying there, yeah, those two banners on the train, I had my suitcase, my rucksack, and my two banners, and it was meant to be a direct train. They redirected us to the bus, and I got distracted in the redirection. I was very tired. It was like maybe 10 o'clock, and I forgot to take the two banners off the top. So they got left in a train in a city in the middle of England, and I'm going to see if I can maybe get them from lost property, but I have no idea what will happen. So yes, fingers crossed. Otherwise, yeah, I'm down 80 quid to replace them, which is not ideal.
That's so annoying.
But otherwise, it was a super lovely day, and I don't want to tarnish that, and have lovely friends. But how about you? What game did you get to play? Any games in the past few days? What was the last game you played?
Well, the last game I played was I was over at a friend's house, and a few of us were there, and I pulled out A Fake Artist Goes to New York. Have you played that game?
I have. It's a lovely game, and I love how I believe it sparked a whole new genre with the one person who's got the information. Sorry, the one person who knows nothing, and then everyone else has the information. And quick hello to Mike. It's lovely to see you. And every like then Spyfall, I think, did it fairly well, and the Chameleon, previously known as Gooseberry from Ricky Tata, that was a nice wee twist on the thing. And I guess you could argue that Snakes is kind of like that.
Yeah, I put all of them in the category of like social deduction games, but where you're doing an activity in which you can, be a traitor or not. So the thing I really love about Fake Artist is you don't just have to, you're not asking people to lie or not lie, or bluff or not bluff. You've got an activity to do. You're drawing a picture. And so I think for people who aren't used to social deduction, like pure social deduction games, that activity gives them something to do and actually makes it an easier experience and often a more interesting experience. And yeah, Snakes was a very similar thought I had about Snakes was, what if we're doing social deduction, but while we're answering trivia questions, there's just something to sort of hang your hat on there. It's like, well, I'm not just bluffing or lying about if I'm a werewolf. It's like, oh, the way I answer this question or the way I contribute to the conversation matters, you know? And so I think Fake Artist, was the first time I saw a game that did that really well. I suppose Werewords is another one where like you're playing 20 questions, so you have a thing
or
to do.
Insider, which also came out around the same time.
Yep. Insider, yeah. So yeah, I really like that genre.
It's interesting that you've pointed out the fact that it's social deduction plus activity. I never really thought about it in that way, because the key parts that for me had connected all of these games was the extreme asymmetry of knowledge. One of my friends is actually working on something which could be argued to be in that same genre, but it is absolutely doing an activity. In this sense, it is kind of, I guess, posing or borderline dancing almost. It sounds a bit weird, but it's actually really fun. And that's the nice thing about games, that they give you freedom to be a little bit weird, right? I don't know if you agree with that.
Especially games like that. Yeah, for sure.
But for me, the thing that made it notable, and I was thinking, oh, maybe this should be exactly the same scoring as those, was the fact that it's the extreme asymmetry of one person knows nothing and everyone else knows this common information. But yeah, there's so many ways that it can go anyway. So Fake Artists in New York, you're a lover of that game. You've played it many times, and it has inspired one of yours.
For sure, yeah. And Spyfall as well is another one I really like. Although I think an interesting counterpoint, because Spyfall, when I've played it with, very, very casual gamers, they find it really intimidating to suddenly have to answer questions about things. And they don't have much, it's very hard in that game, especially if you're the spy really early in the round. You just kind of have to make up a really plausible lie. And I think people find that hard. Whereas in Fake Artist, you can draw a kind of nondescript line or a little squiggle, and, it's usually enough to kind of, for play to just continue without people thinking too much. But yeah, big fan of that genre. And Snakes was definitely my attempt to kind of enter that genre.
And so it's interesting going back to the overall topic of the day, which is about what drives you. In your bio, again, going back to that, you said you're all about making, you pointed out, actually, let me not misquote your words, because it's something about accessibility. What did you write? Easy to learn and socially engaging to play. I hope my designs can bring people of all ages and backgrounds together at the table for meaningful experiences. So there's kind of three parts to this. There's the accessibility, there's the social engagement, and there's the meaningful experiences, which I think goes hand in hand with, if you're socially engaged, it's going to be a meaningful experience. So if I was being unkind to your bio, I would suggest that was a bit redundant. But as it's your website, so you're bigging up yourself. So I totally get that, And if
I had to pad it out somehow, so yeah.
People need to be told, hear things multiple times in order for it to totally register. But was that your thing of thinking, Spyfall is a bit intimidating, Coup, all these wonderful games are just a wee bit intimidating because you're asking pointed questions about what's going on, but trivia, it allows people to be a bit more, have something to distract them from the face-to-face competition going on. Was that what was going on through your mind? What was driving you to make that game?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story how Snakes came about, because I'll admit where it initially came from was purely the design exercise of, I was thinking about what activity could I add social deduction to? And I was because I used to call Fake Artist One Night Ultimate Pictionary, because that's kind of what it feels like. One Night Ultimate Werewolf crossed with Pictionary. And somehow it just struck me, oh, I could do One Night Ultimate Trivial Pursuit. And so that's where that just mashing those two things together is where it came from. But when I was starting to play test it, I noticed two really interesting dynamics. One is because you're discussing a trivia question and there's three possible answers, you can be deceptive. Sometimes the best way to be deceptive is by saying nothing, because the conversation's already going down the wrong track. And so a lot of people found it comfortable that even when they were supposed to be, deceptive, they didn't actually have to make up stuff or, have
because
this.
the options are all there in front of you.
Exactly. So you can point at one and go, oh, that one.
Such a nice thing. I mean, if there's something lovely about infinite possibilities, but where you're measuring stuff or where you can draw literally anything on the canvas, but even in Pictionary, that can be a bit intimidating because I could draw literally anything here. And whilst in Snakes, sure, you can say literally anything, so it does still have infinite possibilities as to how the conversation can go. At least you're constrained by, hey, these are the things that it could be.
Yeah, so people can be, very actively deceptive by simply going, oh, I think it might be B. Or you know what? B makes sense to me because of X, Y, Z. Like you've really got someone, the game sort of holds your hand through taking one side or the other. So that was one thing I noticed people kind of resonated with if they weren't so into social deduction. The other thing, which is something I kind of stumbled across, is in Snakes, the role you play changes every single round. So if you're, a werewolf, in most games, that's your role for the whole game. And then the game ends and then it's over. Whereas in Snakes, every round you're, getting a new random role. And that, I think, that just felt right for the game. But what I realized is for a lot of people, that just really, they know what their job is only for a limited time. So if they're comfortable with one role or the other role, they know it's just for this round anyway, so they don't have to think too far ahead. They don't have to feel for this, for the next half hour, I'm going to be lying or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And even for One Night Ultimate Werewolf, where I can bet, unless I try it and then people are like, you know what, this isn't my kind of game. And then we're like, okay, sure, let's move on to something else. But if people are enjoying it, I can't imagine playing just one game of One Night Ultimate Werewolf. But even there, even though I would consider each of those games a discrete, unconnected round, those do last maybe 7 minutes each, which is a lot compared to one round of Snakes, for example, which might only be like a couple of minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something I stumbled across, and I think it's a really cool element of the game that I'd like to see. It'd be interesting to see if other social deduction games can get into that space of your role not having to be the same the whole time. So yeah, I find, so One Night Ultimate Werewolf is one of my favorite games, but I find it so polarizing. Some people will just love it and want to play it all night, and some people will just run from that game if they don't like their first experience of it. So yeah, I'm often thinking about ways to make social deduction more accessible and palatable to someone who wouldn't usually click with it, I suppose.
And as sometimes I think about like why make games, and I've done a couple of talks at conventions, and I mean, look, people say, oh, if you want to make money, don't make games. And I do think, sure, it's not I will absolutely get rich doing this. It's not a get rich quick scheme necessarily, but I think that there is no shame in, saying, you know what, I am trying to make this thing to be commercially viable. I am making this thing to be a commercial success. And you make some design decisions based on that. I think there's also value in making games that you're thinking, well, this might only sell like 50 or 100 copies, but I think that it's really going to resonate with a tiny number of people, and will sort of like maybe there's a bigger audience, but I don't really know. Like something that is super niche. But there's also value in like communicating with people as an artist. I think that's something possible to do through any medium. I think it's also fine to be designing games, maybe not releasing games, but designing games at least through curiosity. I mean, to tell the truth, last Friday I was trying to think, okay, what's the simplest auction games that I can make, having spent like maybe 20 hours talking about auction games with Alan Paul. I've finished one and now I'm starting on another, and I was thinking, okay, what's the absolute simplest one I could make? Okay, why is that terrible? That's a terrible idea. No, that doesn't work. And then I tried something, and then it just needed more hidden information, and then we tried a second, and like I've got now ideas for another thing, which is going to be really hard to test myself because it's got a bit of Yomi, that thing of, oh, I know what they know, but then they don't know. And I'm moving it away from auctions and towards a sort of push your luck once around bidding thing and see how that works. Why doesn't it work? Because it's a good possibility it might not work, but I'll only fully understand that when it's being played by other people, is the truth, at least for me. I don't know about you, but I learn like as soon as I think I've got a good handle of a mental model of how humans interact with stuff, but even so, I'm always surprised by how humans actually interact with a thing. And so, that's the basic thing. Do you think there's other reasons to make games other than, wanting to make your mark, wanting to communicate professionally, wanting to, make money and sell a bunch, or just professional curiosity? And what I know multiple things probably drive you. Is it different from every single game you make?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Just going back to something you said, it is interesting to hello Dash Yoda. It is interesting to think about the difference between designing for, a mass market or wide popularity and designing for a really niche audience. Because I think there's something interesting happening in the industry now where I guess it's the number of people just playing board games has grown enough that some of these really niche publishers who are targeting very niche audiences are doing incredibly well. So if you said 10 years ago that a publisher like Leader Games would come along and focus on 4-player asymmetric combat games kind of thing, and that would be their whole thing, and they would be one of the best-selling games of the last few years, you'd go, oh, I can't see that happening. But it is happening. And I think there's quite a few publishers now who have found their style and their niche, and that's what makes them cool. That's what makes them exciting to people. And so, I mean, obviously there's a huge draw in wanting to have a big audience and have a game that's played everywhere by lots of people. That's a huge design goal for lots of people, and myself included. But every now and again, even for someone like me who is trying for kind of quite a large audience or broad audience, every now and again, something in you wants to make this very particular weird little game. And I think that's part of the creative process. Is sometimes we all need to put out or try and design that weird, quirky thing that maybe only 20 people will actually like. And I think that's really important. I've got a game coming out soon, which is a 2-player only game with a 3D element where you're like digging dominoes out of a box, and I don't think it'll sell particularly well. Well, it might, who knows? But my feeling around that game is it's got quite a niche audience. And
is that presumably that's not from Joey Games? Is that
no? This is called Tannis. It's coming out through Eagle Griffin.
Okay.
And for a long time, it's been looking for a publisher for absolutely ever. And a lot of publishers aren't super keen on 2-player only designs. Only a few publishers, I guess, really specialize in that. And anyway, it's just an example of like, oh, I really actually don't mind if that game doesn't sell really well, because I think the people who like it will just get it and really like it, and hopefully will have the same, have the response I want them to have when they play. And if that's only one print run and it's done and then everyone forgets about it, I think that's okay if it met that design goal, of like resonating with people who want a weird, puzzly 3D domino digging game.
I mean, there's people who still, I keep hearing people saying, oh yeah, archaeology, one of my favorite things. And so it's like something that came out, I guess now it's 16 years ago.
My game Archaeology.
Yeah. Like I've heard, I mean, I don't keep hearing that's maybe overplaying the card, but I've heard like 2 or 3 people, in the last few years telling me, oh yeah, Archaeology, it's one of my favorite games.
No, that is a really good example actually, because Archaeology, I feel like, has a way bigger reputation than its sales at all. So it's never sold particularly strongly at all. But a few people, if people like it, they really like it and they talk about it. You know what I mean? So that's a good example. I was once at a convention playing games with a man, and he said to me, "Oh, my wife's here. She's not a gamer at all, but she tags along to conventions. She doesn't like any games, but she really likes Archaeology. Would you go and play a game of it with her?" And I was like, "This is amazing." So like this person who doesn't like almost any modern games has for some reason clicked with Archaeology. And that's got that's a very gratifying moment to have. And it's, it's got to be up there with, 1 million copies of Sushi Go. Well, maybe not quite that high, but it's a really great experience because that for that person, that's their game and they've really clicked with it. So, yeah.
I mean, that is, just awesome. And it's like all about that, what it means to that individual, because when you've got big numbers, I mean, you can forget, hey, there's this on the internet, everything's inflated, it's this many views, but then that's not talked about in qualitative terms. You'd say, oh yeah, my tweet made 1,000 impressions, my tweet made 10 impressions, oh, woe is me. But maybe those 10 impressions were with someone who, even though they maybe didn't reply, they just really felt, you know what, that's sparked something in my mind. Maybe it made them smile a little bit. Maybe you added to their day. And my tweets made negative 10 impressions, says Xate. But you get what I mean? It's, we forget about the individual sometimes when we obsess about the numbers.
Well, the ultimate example of that for me is, you think about, and not to diss Monopoly at all, but to think about Monopoly sales, they would, obviously in a lot of Western countries completely trump any hobby game sales by a huge margin. But how many of those sales are turning into plays? And how many of those plays are like high quality, I love this game plays? How many copies of Monopoly sit on the shelf and are just given as gifts and they're never opened? So you have to have other metrics for success. And I think people resonating with the game, playing the game often, and especially one for me is hearing that people playing games with their kids or with their grandparents. Whenever I hear about intergenerational moments, I think, wow, if a game can accomplish that, then I must be doing something right, And sales may reflect that is happening, but they might not. They might just reflect that there's an amazing marketing machine pushing a product, Oh, I think you might be muted, Bez.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Because my fan is whirring, and I was worried that my computer fan is my computer fan audible on the other end?
Very, very vaguely. It's fine.
Okay, that's fair enough. And Tom says, I'm normally at work around this time, but it's a holiday in the UK, so I'm free to hang around on Twitch. I'm glad to have you. Yeah, I think it's only a holiday because we're getting a new monarch, which my favourite thing about the new monarch is we have coronation crisps and coronation
Oh, really?
special sandwiches. So we've got, limited edition food, which I'm always a fan of, new food.
Wow. What flavor are the King Charles crisps?
They're basically curry and raisinish. They're kind of curry flavour.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yes. Clearly it's not my biggest fan, says Yoda. I love that. Let's go back to the recent highlights. What is a typical day in the life of Phil like? What do you normally do? Because you're a full-time designer, but you do have other obligations. So in as much detail as you're wanting, and feel free to say, oh yeah, from this time to this time, I'm not going to tell you. What is a typical, let's go for a life in the day?
Well, starting as of pretty much this year, Meredith and I have started up our own little publishing company, Joey Games. So that means I'm kind of running a business, like a proper actual business, as well as just my design work. So at the moment, it's probably roughly half that I'm doing stuff for Joey, and I'm doing just design stuff for me, because I'm definitely going to keep designing games for other publishers, and I'll design lots of stuff that doesn't necessarily fit the Joey kind of style. But yeah, so I work from home, and I'm in my office right now. I have a bit of a workspace.
Right now, it's about 7:46, I believe.
That's right. Yep.
What time do you normally wake up? Are you an early riser? Let's start there.
No, not at all. So I guess I need to preface all of this by saying, I don't think I'm good at all at working from home and being a freelancer. I've been doing it for a few years now, but I have not got a great routine or figured out how to do it well. And I think when you're working in a more regular job, the thought of being able to set your own hours and be your own boss is so attractive. And it is a great privilege. But the dark side of it is that at least if you're my personality type, not having someone tell you what to do and operating out of fear, guilt, and shame actually makes life tricky. You actually have to set your own boundaries and set your own schedule and set your own deadlines and impart meaning into them. If some faceless dude in a suit tells me you need to have this in by Friday, I'll be scared and I'll get it done. But if I tell myself, I should do this by Friday, it's that's just Phil. It doesn't mean anything. So I am not that good at this, and I'm still learning. And so my days aren't particularly regimented at all. So I'm not a morning person at all. And I've only recently, I think, embraced that enough to say, if I don't really start work till later in the morning, that's okay.
What are you talking? 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock?
10:30. I think if it gets to 11, I start to feel really guilty. But I'm not good at starting at doing 9 to 5. So I often find I do a few chunks of work during the day, and I often am really productive at night after dinner. And so for me, it's more about making sure I feel like I've done a good amount of work across the week, rather than saying I need to do X hours a day or X hours in the day. So it's a hard question to answer in a way because it changes a lot. So today, for example, I went to a cafe and worked in a cafe for an hour. I came home. I worked sprawled on the couch for an hour because I felt really tired. Then I came in here and I worked for a few hours on a prototype in here. And then I went and did some errands, And so it's that's very different from a 9 to 5 workday, but I'm slowly getting used to thinking of it in a different light, which is setting myself tasks, making sure I'm working hard, but also not being too hard on myself if it's not particularly structured. Yeah.
Would you say you have full days off, or at least, hey, this whole afternoon or this whole evening is just for me and I'm not going to let design time intrude on that?
I actually find that really hard, because before I was full-time or even a designer for money at all, designing was one of my restful activities. It's like, oh, I've got time off, I'm gonna design a game, because it was like a fun hobby. So now I often find I get to the weekend and I tell myself, oh, I really need a day off, I'll just do nothing on Saturday. And then I just find my brain, creeping over towards working on a design problem, because that's just so naturally where I go when I just want to do something fun. So I'm at a point now where I'm consciously trying to find a new hobby, so I can be like, oh, it's Saturday, I need to go do my hobby that has nothing to do with games. But I haven't found one.
Like maybe getting
back
into
really lame
music.
To be looking for a hobby. But anyway.
When was the last time? So actually, let's quickly do the brilliant thing. Brilliant thing. What's the little thing which is brilliant? What's the little thing which is brilliant, Phil? I can wave my hands until you say.
Can you give me a little more to work with?
A quick hello to Dr. Flimflam Esquire for following. Thank you very much. But anyway, what's a brilliant thing?
Do you just mean any brilliant thing?
Literally any brilliant thing. It could be boxes, it could be oxygen, it could be any of the things that we talked about already.
Okay. A brilliant thing is...
hopefully something that everyone can relate to and is undervalued, and people don't normally call it brilliance. It's all about raising the things that we don't notice.
Okay, here's a brilliant thing. Going for a walk. Going for a walk is a brilliant thing, because especially if you work from home or you work in an office, going for a walk, I don't ever feel like I want to do it, but every time I get back from a walk, I have a clearer mind. I have often progressed some problem I've been thinking about in my head, and you get a bit of exercise too. So I'm going to say going for a walk is a brilliant thing.
I will agree with that. I mean, I love... it's hard to get myself outside if I don't have like a destination in mind, which is why I think I'm really blessed to have ducks, maybe 20 minutes away. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to see the ducks, and then maybe I'll stand there for 1 minute or 2 or 3 minutes even, and then I'll walk back. And that feels like it's a short enough walk that I don't have to really plan my day around it. And I don't feel like it's taking me away from work or anything, but it's long enough that I feel like I've gotten outside. So I feel like, I just going for a walk, if you're like feeling a little bit stuck and you're, hey, need a bit of a recharge, go for a walk. Love it.
100%.
Talking about physical stuff, my robot is reminding me to get out of the chair and do a tiny bit of stretching. Meanwhile, let's do questionably quick questions is the next section. It's not an interrogation, it's just a questionably quick question section. What instruments do you play?
What instruments do I play? Well, pretty much just guitar. I guess you could say bass as well, but pretty much just guitar. So
podcasts or books?
Pardon?
Podcasts or books?
Podcasts or books? Podcasts.
What's the last one you listened to, and who would you recommend it to?
Oh, let me think. You know what I've been listening to? There was this board game podcast that was one of the first ones to come out when I first started designing in about 2007-8, called The Metagamers. And it's since I'm pretty sure it's disappeared from the internet, so it's probably a bad recommendation. But I happened to save it on my iTunes, and I still have it. And it's just one of my favorite. It is so nerdy, like the level of detail they get into about the games they're discussing.
Wow, so there's no way to listen to it unless You
It might it could still exist because a lot of podcasts, once they're uploaded to services, just stay there forever. But it's called the Metagamers, and it was around
Metagamers.
2007, 2008, 2009, yeah. And one of the hosts is Jason Little, who went on to design a whole bunch of stuff, including the Star Wars X-Wing game. So it's kind of interesting hearing him talk about the hobby before he was kind of super famous. And yeah, it's just fun hearing nerds talk about games. So that's what I've been listening to.
Okay, the next question is, what's your favorite type of shoe?
Favorite type of shoe would be Converse All-Stars or any fair trade ripoff of Converse All-Stars.
Would you rather be a shark for a day or a pigeon for a day?
Got to go with pigeon. Like, ability to fly trumps everything, I think.
And what is your favorite new sushi in Sushi Go Party? The one that's maybe you're proudest of, or maybe you're like, hey, you know what, that's really added to the game. I don't know.
Oh, my favorite. Oh, it changes a lot, but the
Your
one
favorite
that
new
I
one,
think,
so discounting all the originals.
okay, yeah, I think it would have to be miso soup, which isn't actually sushi, but it's a soup. Just because I was.
Can you
I
remind
had
us
no
what
new.
that one does?
So that one is the one where if you play it, it's worth 3 points unless
yes.
anyone else plays it on the same turn. So when I thought of that, unless anyone else plays on the same turn, I was like, that's a new thing. That's new. Like, I had no new ideas. And then I found that tiny little bit of design space. So I was always happy with miso
And
soup.
it's really interesting. It adds all these mind games, and there's definitely some sorts of tension. I mean, obviously, in two-player, that's pointless. It's a zero-sum, basically, so it goes back to the calculation. But as soon as you're in 3 players or more, it goes back to that yummy and guessing what other people are going to do, which is absolutely delightful. Now, speaking of all that, I had said that we would play a quick game of Sushi Go on Board Game Arena and chat about it. So if you could accept my game on a different screen or different window if you've got that going on.
Yep, so I've got another window open. Okay, I think I'm in.
Yes. So, even though you shouldn't really be able to see my hand, but, it doesn't really matter. We're playing for fun. And I think I set it to be very slow turn-based, but we're going to get it done, just now. It's just to avoid us timing out as we chat. And I just thought it would be interesting to do a very quick... so part of me, when I asked people what should we talk about, and I gave them a few different options, like one of the things that I really wanted to do was an in-depth design look at this, because at 2 players, there are so many interesting design principles. Well, there's such an interesting decision space here. I mean, straight away, you've got the sushi that are clearly better than the others. Obviously, the squid is like 1, 2, or 3 points. You know what you're going to get. But then anything else that is potentially going to offer you more than 2 is kind of a bit of a risk. And you've got these dumplings which feel like they are a trap because they're basically you're never going to get more than 3 of them realistically, unless it's one of those weird hands where you get like 6 of them, and then you're like, okay, this is the turn where I'm going to use my chopsticks from the other hand and then take the 2 dumplings, because those are clearly the best thing in this particular hand. And similarly with the sashimi, when you've got you've got 0, 0, 10, like this kind of spike, it definitely adds a lot of, how can I put it, like tension and excitement. And the really interesting thing is that, firstly, you've got the consideration of, well, if there's 2 and there's 2 players, I'm guaranteed one of them, because unless you've got chopsticks, of course, which changes everything around. But it's also the fact that there's just this delicious risk attached to it. But then the risk isn't quite equal. So you can have these first level strategies. I mean, what was going through your mind when, and yeah, feel free to, all the best for cleaning your flats or whatever you're doing at the same time. But what was going through your mind when you first made Sushi Go? Because this was not your first game. It was like, what, you're for what?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'd done a few self-published games before. I think the main thing going through my mind was to make the simplest card drafting game I could, really. So I played. So Seven Wonders had just come out, and I really liked Fairy Tale as well, which is a Japanese game. But I found them like too much for really casual gamers, especially just hard to teach to casual gamers. So I thought this mechanism is so cool. I want to do something that that almost anyone could learn and play. So that was what was going through my mind. And as I was designing the cards, I think what you were just saying about the risk reward, I realized that was a really great dynamic in card drafting where you're passing the cards, because you kind of know what's, at the table and it's coming around to you, but there's this really nice anticipation of, will I be able to get them all? Will I not? Should I play it safe? Should I be a bit more risky? So I really lent into that with the kind of design of each card. Yeah.
Absolutely. And like there's again like the wasabi, which I just saw you take. I mean, there's something delicious about that. And then now going through my mind, I'm thinking, okay, do I take the salmon, which is giving me 2, but if you get it, it's going to give you 6 points. But if I take it, I know that there's no other nigiri, so then you've kind of wasted your wasabi, which is great.
Yes.
Or conversely, do I take the tempura, and that's guaranteeing me the 5 points, which if you grab the other one, that's guaranteeing you the 5 points. So then again, we get into the mind games, because you'll have seen this one tempura. So which one do you go for? And I'm expecting you to make your choice while I'm talking about this. But yeah, so this kind of feels like the slightly higher risk thing, but yeah, I'm going for interesting.
Yeah, I really value an early game pudding. Oh, but
I mean,
yeah, so this is
really
painful.
interesting because they
to
kind
play
of
game
remind. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was just saying, you taking both nigiri is so painful, because normally early wasabi is one of the best plays you can make, because you are going to get some points out of it for sure. But I'm not this time. So,
And like in my mind, I'm thinking like the dumplings probably not worth it, because I don't have perfect eidatic. Is it called eidatic memory when you remember everything? But see, I went for the tempura, and I'm like, yes, you didn't grab the other tempura. I was just banking on it, because you could have really scuppered me that way. But now that you've got the chopsticks, like if you do get all 4 of those dumplings, then suddenly that's worth quite a bit. And so, and also it does mean that now you're threatening to take both the sashimi, which is really interesting, because there's exactly 3 in our hands. So you could take those 2 and then grab this one. So do I actually grab the sashimi just to counter that possible play? Or do I take this tempura for the guaranteed 5 points? But if you do take the 2 sashimi, then not only have I countered you, but also I've managed to grab the second tempura anyway. So yeah.
Well, I just realized your rating is 298. So so it is not surprising to hear you and you took the sashimi. Okay, great.
And how does Bez have a higher ELO than Phil himself? Shenanigans.
I have only played a couple of times on Board Game Arena, and I'm not that good at Sushi Go. But you have now rendered 3 of my cards worthless. So congratulations. But yeah, the chopsticks is an interesting card, because most gamers who play Sushi Go are like, oh, the chopsticks, that's the card that makes it, that's the cool thing you added, that's the clever part. But I almost designed it purely by accident. I was thinking of what other special cards I could have. So I'd figured out Wasabi, and I was trying to think, oh, a couple other special cards might be good. What else can I do? And for some reason, the first thing that just popped into my head was, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you could break the rules? I mean, that's how I always design special cards. How can I break the rules?
Yeah, what rules are there, and how can this one be destroyed and smashed?
Exactly. So I was like, well, I can break the rule of only taking one card per turn, which is one of the most important rules of any card drafting game. And so that's where Chopsticks came from. But it's interesting.
Did you ever try a different number? Did you ever try... I mean, how would it work if you were to take... That can't work, really, because, yeah, the Chopsticks, it's one turn to take it, and the next one you put it back. But there's not really a way to take 3 cards in the turn, nor is there?
Yeah, so...
I mean, you could swap cards. You could take 3 cards and then put 2 cards back. I mean, that would require you to have 2 cards. I mean, did you ever try that? I'm assuming it would be terrible.
I never... So, yeah, Chopsticks is tricky because you can't... Well, you don't want to mess with the hand size of each hand. You want all the hands to be the same size. But I have tested a card which works pretty well, which is like Chopsticks, but you can also swap cards, any number of cards between your hand and your collection.
Wow.
So, but that's a bit crazy,
Any number is wow.
Yeah. But it's a bit too chaotic, but it makes some interesting plays.
I mean, to be honest, the thing is that Chopsticks already feels like it gives it just the perfect amount of chaos, and like the whole I mean, we already had the mind games with the tempura going on, but then the additional mind games with the sashimi was very interesting. It's like, okay, now I grab this knowing that you're going to take that, for example.
How did you know I was going to do that? Yeah, it's interesting. I've always liked 2-player Sushi Go for all the reasons you're talking about, but a lot of people really don't enjoy it. So I think it must be the most polarizing way to play. I think it's probably not loved because it feels like you have to memorize the hands, which I totally get. Like, no one wants to have to memorize a hand to play well. But I think if you kind of play a little fast and loose and not worry too much, it can still be fun. Okay, 9 to 16. Oh, I didn't do as badly as I thought. Yeah, so when I did Sushi Go Party, I wanted to come up with a couple of cards that would make 2-player more dynamic. And so the 2 card, there's Menu, which lets you draw from the deck. So that completely throws a spanner in any kind of memorizing the other player's hand kind of thing. And there's also Takeout Box, which lets you turn any cards over and they just become worth 2 points. So you can't fully predict what, your opponent will end up with. So those 2 cards help 2-player a little bit, I think, if you're not a fan.
I mean, what I find is really interesting is people who on Board Game Geek talk about the points per card, and I think that's a really valuable way to think about it. I mean, in any game, what is the expectation value almost? What are you potentially getting with each of your actions? And in Sushi Go, each card is an action. But along the way, it's also the thing that makes a game replayable is do the different deals offer different puzzles to solve? And do you actually then have something... Yeah, is there so much chaos from the deal that it's new, but you don't feel any agency, which would be terrible? Or conversely, with a perfect information game, which I do still love, for lots of people, well, it's just not got the variety that they're looking for, which is clearly sad.
Yeah, and I think getting the numbers of how many of each card are in the deck right for Sushi Go was largely that question, which is you don't really want a hand where there's only one dumpling, or where there's wasabi but no nigiri, or other things like that. So getting the deck right was that exactly trying to solve that problem of I want every round to feel like a little puzzle that has good things to do in it and isn't just this round's a dud.
What was your take on the distribution of the nigiri? I can't remember offhand what it actually is. I think it might say at the bottom.
So there's I think there's, I'd have to check, but there's mainly 2s, a few 3s, and a few more than that 1s. So the main thing I was thinking was,
we go 5 squids, 10 salmons, and 5 eggs. So it's basically a bell curve around 2.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking of Sushi Go Party. It's a little different, but yeah. So 2 points was my anchor value for any card. So if you get 2 points out of a card, that's kind of middle of the road. So obviously with the nigiri, 2 was kind of an average, and then the 2 extremes would be 1 or 3. Yeah, it was that simple, really. But nigiri kind of are important because they help you anchor what the other cards should be worth. So even a very casual player, because they see the nigiris, they'll go, oh, okay, so 3 points is a pretty good play, or 2 points is an average play, because I can get that just by playing a single card.
Do you think there's value in shaping the curve in a slightly more lopsided way, maybe? Like maybe having flat distribution, or even alternatively, maybe just making it more 1s and 3s and fewer 2s. I mean, what would have been the results of that emotionally, do you think?
The trick with them was, I suppose, the interaction with the wasabi, and having a lot of 2s meant that wasabi often gave you a really good but not insanely good play.
That's
a wasabi
like 4
with
points
a squid,
essentially for the wasabi.
Yeah, a wasabi with a squid is pretty much the best play in the game in terms of points per card. So, well, it is. So I didn't want that to be too easy to pull off. And at the same time, I didn't want too many 1s because they're just boring. So you don't want to see too many 1s. So I think that's how I kind of landed on the way it is.
That makes a lot of sense. And for sure, that emotional reaction of, hey, I've gotten this wasabi squid thing. I mean, that should be a big play. That shouldn't be just, oh yeah, it happens every time.
Yeah.
And by the same token, having the slightly sad play of the egg, it's like, well, at least it's unfortunate, and it comes out. You don't want people to be sad too often, is an easy way to put it as a designer. I mean, you want people to have fun. I mean, this is not a game about spreading a message or getting people to think differently about their life. This is a game about making simple, tactical, occasionally strategic decisions and having a good time together, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think helping people get Sushi Go is nice because you get quick feedback on simple decisions. So you have 3 rounds. The rounds are really quick. At the end of each round, you get to go, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that worked so well. Look what I got. And interesting about the egg, no one likes an egg, nigiri, unless you played a wasabi and there's just nothing left in the round. Suddenly that egg is like, oh, I desperately just give me even an egg to put on that wasabi. So that's a bit of a fun feeling as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is the joy of it, that the hands can be varied. And I think that the cards not getting shuffled does... Ooh, very nice. So here, like, you've got the chopsticks. So here the sashimi is all yours, potentially. If you were to grab D2 and then take one on this turn, you know that I can't grab both because you've seen that. And conversely, I probably know that you know that. So maybe I don't take a sashimi. So conversely, do you actually take just the one sashimi, but then you're leaving yourself open to, you know, being me doing the gamble?
Yeah, but this is the deepest game of Sushi Go I've ever played. But I do miss in Sushi Go Party. You just mentioned how in this version you don't reshuffle the deck, and that's something I do kind of miss in Sushi Go Party, where you just have to. I had to make it so you reshuffle, just because of the nature of the card pool and everything. But there's something fun in this game where, you know, if you had a round with heaps of dumplings, there'll be less dumplings later, or whatever. It just adds a slight little bit of anticipation to the different rounds.
Randomness with replacements, as happens if you do shuffle everything back in, although it's not full replacements because you've got the desserts cards that stay out, does that lead, presumably that's going to lead towards more skewed hands, which might also lead to more excitement?
Yeah, it does mean sometimes you get, like you draw a hand and it's all marquee rolls, or it's heaps of puddings, and you think, okay, the flavor of this round, no pun intended, just changed because there's one hand going around the table which is just full of puddings. That's interesting, and you have to then reassess, you know, how many puddings am I going to go for? How many are likely to get if they're all in one hand? Yeah, it's a cool thing about playing through the deck entirely.
Speaking of puddings, I was thinking about that and trying to work out whether, I wanted to leave the chopsticks just to offer myself the chance of pudding and something else there.
Yeah, the chopsticks have been really, I mean, I use them to great advantage, but then you get them. So I had to take the sashimi then, just on the off
Absolutely.
chance that
And I mean, that's 10 points. That's
Yeah.
probably going to win you the game.
Yeah. Just on the off chance that you did take the chopsticks, because then you would totally steal the sashimi from me.
Were you tempted? I mean, dumplings are interesting because they've got this great promise of massive points, but they never really feel like they're going to pay off, except on the really weird hands where they finally do. But were you ever tempted to, I don't know, beef them up a little bit? Like...
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing about... Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose the thing about dumplings is that often they get left till a bit late in the round, and at some point a player might go, that's it, I'm going in on dumplings, and they start grabbing them. And sometimes, you know, if you get 4 or 5, the return is pretty great.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to have that feeling with them of like, at some point you've got to jump in and just go for them. And I think they're sort of made a bit better by the fact that they're risk-free. Like, you will always get points. Once you get up to like 3 of them is as good as getting 3 salmon nigiri. You'll never not get points from them. So they're just safe, you know, as well. But I like that moment in the round where you have to kind of decide, am I jumping in or not? Oh,
yes. Too competitive.
So
I think it came down to the getting the Mackie rolls, which did eke out the 3 extra points. Because that was like a 6-point swing there, versus the dumplings, which I think were a 4-point swing.
Yeah. So what I had 5 rolls to 6. Yep. That was the game. Yeah.
But and quick hello to Josie. And Mike asks, how do you feel about your games being on Board Game Arena?
That's a great question, actually. I've been thinking about that a lot. I'm, for the most part, absolutely love it. So I see no downside. Especially I've seen with Gizmos has almost gotten this second life by being on BGA. So it's pretty much out of print and not being played that much physically. But as soon as it was put on BGA, I suddenly started getting emails about it again. The forums on Board Game Geek kind of started happening again. So it's really great for games that are a bit forgotten. It can really give them a bit of a shot in the arm. It's really great for games like Sushi Go, which is just a great platform to play casually and easily. So I love them being on there. The one really tiny downside, which I'm just thinking through at the moment, is when a game goes on BGA before it's physically released, which is happening a bit more often now that some publishers are using BGA as a little bit of a promotional tool to get a bit of discussion happening before a game comes out. And so that happened with My Shelfie. At least, I should say, most English-speaking markets didn't have it yet, and it was on BGA. And I think, depending on the game, it can be not the best way to first experience a
Because,
game.
I mean, My Shelfie has the physical aspect of this big production value that you kind of miss from the digital aspect.
Yeah.
Is that your point?
Exactly. Yeah, so for a game which relies on table presence a bit, obviously you lose that. But for even some games just don't make their mark. Like the first impression of My Shelfie, part of it is the physical presence, 100%. But part of it is, I think a lot of puzzly games like My Shelfie just work better in person with a 3-dimensional puzzle in front of you, you know? Like Azul would be another example. Like if everyone first played Azul on BGA before playing the actual game with the tiles, I don't think it would have quite landed. I think there's something about the physicality of puzzle games. And so I have noticed with My Shelfie, some people really love it, but a lot of people might just play it once on BGA and go, oh, it's not clicking. I don't quite get what the point of this game is. And I just think it happens to not maybe leave the best in first impression digitally. So that's something I've been thinking about. But even then, I'm not sure if it's a net. There's so many positives to it that I'm definitely not saying it's a bad thing. But it's just something I'm thinking through, is that first impression.
Do you feel like digital implementations where the rules are enforced are closer to video games or board games? I mean, it's a blurry line, but what's your gut reaction?
So when I play on BGA, I always am playing games I already know. That's how I use it. It's games I know and love that I want to play to relax, or I want to play with friends online. So for me, I'm always picturing and thinking about the physical board game. And so it feels like just a nice way to play it easily and digitally. But if I were to just pick a random game on BGA I didn't know, you know, and learn it and play it online, I guess, yeah, it is a very blurry line, isn't it? I think anything that's turn-based, though, even a video game that's turn-based, and could theoretically exist in cardboard form, I'm still interested in it for the same reasons I think I'm interested in board games, in that it's the same principles of design are in play. So, yeah, but interesting thought.
I mean, I definitely use it to learn rules, and there's times when I've played a board game arena game and I didn't know the game before, and I still don't understand the game afterwards because I didn't read through the rules. I just kind of clicked, and but the game, it's weird because if you play that way, you can play to the end and you know you've played correctly, but you might still not have learnt it. Whereas if you play to the end of a board game physically, you'll probably have more chance of having learnt at least a good part of it, but you've got far less chance of playing it correctly. There's, a very good chance that you might have missed something in the rules, or, you got some turn order slightly wrong or whatever. But, in Board Game Arena, there's no chance of that ever happening, in theory, unless there's a bug, of course.
Yeah, no, it is interesting that you it's a funny way to learn a game, isn't it? Because the rules are being enforced, but not necessarily explained to you. So it's like, I couldn't do that, but I'm not sure why I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. Whereas in real life, you have to understand the rule to enforce it on yourself. So yeah, it's an interesting thought.
And just for the record, like, the way that I learned Root was by playing the Steam app, and then when it came time to playing, against someone in real life, cats versus birds, I'd already, read a lot of it because you can look it up on Board Game Geek, and then we played a physical copy, and I was already at a big advantage, even though the other person actually owned the game. And so it's interesting because that is done as an interactive tutorial, whereas the tutorials on Board Game Arena aren't exactly interactive. They're kind of click through, do exactly this one thing. You don't get any choice. But with error messages, I think there is a possibility with mindful error messages to guide people towards what they have to do. I actually played one game where I made a move and it said, warning, the designer thinks that although this move is legal, it makes no strategic sense. Are you sure you want to make this move? And that was really interesting. Like, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So I could have done all these other things. Okay, thank you for. And so, yeah, sure, I'll click, yes, I'm not sure. And then I'll do the other things. And so,
yeah, some board game apps I play have similar things where they'll say, like, are you sure you want to buy this card this way? Because if you bought it that way, it'd be better. Like, I really appreciate those pop-up moments because it's a way of explaining to you how to get better at the game, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, like, if there's this is really niche, okay? But are you familiar with photosynthesis?
Photosynthesis, the game.
Yeah, by Halmar.
I've only played it once, but yep.
I absolutely adore this game. I'm also undefeated at it in 2-player mode. But photosynthesis, if you upgrade a medium tree to a big, then the medium tree could go onto the board, and so then your next medium tree could be one light cheaper. So there, it's a case of, well, if you bought a medium and then you bought a big, imagine if there was such an error message at the end to say, hey, by the way, you bought a medium and then a big, and if you'd done it in the opposite order, then you would save one light. Do you want to save that one light? Now, it's a big ask for people who are generally volunteer programmers to put in that level of fidelity and railroading. But I think that is something that would make it super helpful in terms of, oh, wow, I knew the rules of the game, but that didn't even occur to me.
Yeah, and it raises the question of how much strategy do you put in a rule book?
Because there's absolutely some people who hate that. I mean, if Xate is still listening, I know that she would say, as soon as I get to bits in the rule book that says strategy, I don't want to read it. And maybe that sort of enforced strategy advice on Board Game Arena would be something that turns off people who want to mess up and then discover it for themselves. It's a balance of who are you targeting and who do you aim it at? It's really hard.
Yeah, interesting example of that is my game Summer Camp, which was, sort of aimed at a more mass market audience, is a deck builder. For me, who's played lots of deck builders, I kind of structured the rules in a way that I thought was, helpful to players. And I explained the basics of deck building, and I thought I did that, okay. But there's this really not funny, but interesting review on Amazon of someone who's gotten the game. And they're basically saying, this is the most complex game I've ever tried to learn. It doesn't make any sense. And he goes through all these rules that the game tells you to do, like different size starting hands and reshuffling your deck and all these things. And after each question, after just explaining each rule, he goes, why? Why am I supposed to do this? And he's just, this reviewer is incensed that he's being asked to do things that are different from a traditional card game, and he's not being told why. And to him, that's just like a throw your hands up in the air and don't even bother moment. Whereas for a gamer, we see rules as like, oh, you're just giving me the skeleton of how to play. This is not the time to ask why. This is just the time to learn the game, and I'll figure out why. But I think for a more mass market audience, it's not even strategy. It's just explaining game concepts as you teach them. So, for example, if I could go back in time, I'd probably rewrite the summer camp rulebook to be way more hand-holding, in the sense of saying, here's why we're reshuffling our deck, because you bought all these cool cards and now you're going to get to play them again, or whatever. So I think there's a way rule books could do a bit of what we're talking about here, which is help people understand just what a good play is and why it's a good play. Yeah.
And it's always a challenge. I mean, it is impossible to obviously appeal to everyone. And if you've got enough hand-holding for a novice gamer, then that's probably going to be too much for someone who wants to sort out the puzzle themselves. But I'm aware that we've been talking for a long time, and I want to be mindful of your time. I guess we come back to the central question of, at this point, I'm assuming that your sales from, what keeps you making games? Why do you keep designing games? Why do you not kind of soft retire? Why do you not, go back to working on music? Why not make films? Why make games? Why do you keep doing this? Why?
I think for me, and every designer is going to have a slightly different question, but I think for those of us who have the creative impulse, putting something we've made out into the world for others to enjoy is something that is almost addicting as a pursuit. Like, you want to keep getting better at it, and you want to keep seeing people enjoy your games, and there's a progression there. Where I'm at, I guess, in my career is, you're right. Like, I've designed more games than I ever thought I would. I've had more games published than I ever thought I would. If I were to stop now, I would go, wow, like, that's more than I ever thought I would get to do. So I'd be really happy with that. But a couple of things keep driving me. One is I would love to make games that prove over time to have some positive influence on culture. So part of why I start up Joey Games is wanting to put games with Australian themes out that are just something of a slightly healthier cultural text than a lot of this Australian stuff we have here in Australia. For lots of reasons, a lot of Australians don't like thinking about our history and thinking about who we are without being ironic and cringy and kind of just being silly about it. And I think trying to make games that just celebrate Australia in a healthy way is something at the moment that is really driving me. But to step back even another level, I think if you are someone who feels you've been gifted with talents or skills or resources or a position in which you can give something into the world, then I very much feel that I want to use my gifts wisely and use my gifts in a way that is not wasting them. So I think all creative people can probably relate to that. That
like,
if
you've
you've been
spent
given a
so
gift,
many
you want to
years
share it.
honing this skill that you kind of want to keep doing things because you feel like there are more games to be made than what you've done.
100%.
Do you believe that the best games are yet to be made?
Oh yeah, this is the thing, right? I think the best movies have been made, and I think the best books have been written, but I don't think the best games have been made. And I think
Wow.
that's because game design is a young art, even though it's thousands and thousands of years old. Game design, as we think of it, is a very young art, and Dominion, which changed the industry in a way, the hobby industry anyway, could have been made in 5000 BC. Someone could have gotten some. Well, it would be a bit hard. Let's say when there's papyrus around. So let's say
it certainly could have been made like 500 years ago when traditional
of
playing
course.
cards were already a big thing.
Exactly, yeah. And that to me is what's so amazing about the game design pursuit, is that it's purely, like, it's almost entirely tied to idea, like rules and ideas, rather than technology or the physical element. Now, exploring the physical element is a fun thing to do, and exploring technology in games is a fun thing to do. But
I mean, for
designing
sure,
the
my
game,
Shelfie, the physicality of it does enforce you've got to drop it bottom to top, like traditional Connect 4.
totally. And I find that world of design fascinating. But the thing for me that's really driving is, like, there is a game out there that's just 50 cards or 100 cards or 50 tiles or whatever, that hasn't been made yet, that will, blow the world away with how fun and exciting it is. And I just think that's the magic of game design, and that's why it's so why I keep wanting to do it, and I don't get bored of it, because I think, just around the next corner could be the next great game design. Like, that's amazing to me,
That sounds like we've come full circle back to the heart of why you do these things. And at this point, of course, as we start wrapping up, I've asked you lots of stuff. Now, what would you like to ask me, and potentially anyone watching? What would you like to ask Phil as the question of the day? Question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. Question of the day. I mean, I'm just going to keep waving until you come up with the question.
Okay. Here's my question for you. Bez.
Okay.
So I haven't played many of your games, but I know about them, and I've seen you on Twitter and other places post about them and stuff. And they always have a fascinating premise to me when I hear you talk about them. So here's my question. Out of all the core concepts of any of your designs, as quirky as they are, what is the one you're most, maybe proud is too strong a word, but the one you're most happy and excited by? The one that you think that was a good idea?
Oh, that's a hard question. I would invite anyone watching, if you know my games, like, tell me what you think. But I've not got the comments tab up just yet. It does ping me when there's a little light that goes on when more comments turn up. So I'm not going to look at that because that feels like that would be cheating. I do, even though it feels like a cop-out answer because it's a best-selling, like, Yogi does feel like a nice thing, because at the time when I was making it, multiple people said, does this not already exist? It feels so simple. And that's what I felt, I'm really proud of that. Yesterday was Sunday, I did say at one point my current favorite is a game about setting scenarios that other people would do for different lengths of time, where you've got some number of people who are all trying to vote the same as each other of how long they would do something for, whether it's seconds or minutes, hours or days, weeks or a few months, years and years, or always forever. But the one person who's setting this scenario is trying to get them to be diverse. and trying to get them to differentiate what. And it's not an easy concept to say, but yeah, out of the games that I was selling yesterday, I think that is the one that I'm currently most excited to share, because that feels like something that facilitates conversation. It brings people together, even if they never knew each other. And with the people who did know each other, they generally all laughed and were like, oh, this is lovely. And that's, for me, the passion behind it. But then I also, sorry to toot my own horn. The other things that I'm thinking of are a game about drawing creatures, complimenting the drawings and complimenting the compliments, where at least one person's rated it a 1 as a genuine thing, where they say, you know what, I just don't get this. People rate it highly just because it's made by Bez. And I don't think I command that much respect. That's how I influence people's ratings of my games. But it's a nice thing to hear. And then reflecting on that made me appreciate that it does actually have a good rating. But the whole point of the game is that, well, I made it as a joke because someone was saying, oh, what if you have some dice? And then I was explaining how I did my game about wee whimsical creatures and trying to identify the mutters makes noises, where I kind of randomized what I was drawing to ensure that I would still draw fresh creatures for each thing. And they said, well, that's your next game. Do a bunch of dice and get people to draw things. And I was thinking at the time, oh, dice aren't great. That's expensive. But, it could work with cards as long as I get them to all be nothing is, what's the word I'm looking for, contradictory. And then I thought, well, if you are just voting on the best picture, that's kind of sad. What if everyone gets complimented? And then what if we vote on the best compliments? Which I moved away even from that. So now you don't vote on the best compliments. It's just like each person compliments whatever the best compliments they felt they got was. So that person who gave the best compliments feels like, wow, they're complimenting me. That I feel really good about that. But also, it's by complimenting something, you're valuing it. And we value art, we value game design, we value running fast. But why do we not value compliments themselves? Do you know what I mean? And I think that by going, even though it was just a recursive, slightly meta joke, actually by saying, you know what, I really appreciated your compliment because you were direct and you said something that I was a bit kind of apprehensive about. And so that made me feel really good. Thank you very much. That was a great compliment. Doing that actually encourages us to make better compliments. And I think that, if I'm doing I think, 3rd edition reprint for the Kickstarter, which will hopefully be with me. The printer had some personal issues with delays. They've got goodies. I do apologise, but it'll be with me soon, and hopefully in time for UK Games Expo, and I'll send it out to everyone. And I hope that as people play it more and more, whereas other games, don't get me wrong, learning how to strategize, learning how to plan ahead, these are really valuable things. Learning how to tell if someone's lying, that's a valuable thing. But I also think that learning to see the good in the world around you and learning to compliment is a really valuable thing. And that's why, actually, having talked through it, the other things I was kind of tempted to say were hashtag Drawn Together game, which is the first ever cutthroat, competitive, strategic game about colouring in. So even though it's colouring in, it's not nice at all. It's very in your face. I'm going to destroy your thing.
So not a mindfulness activity.
Well, it's not an activity at all, because it is subjective, arguably, who wins, because you show it to a third-party judge to determine the winner. But it's normally when I show it on Twitter and say, is this a heart or skull? Which person actually won? Which thing is more visible? It's normally at least 70% one thing. And sometimes I've even seen it be 26 people voted and everyone voted for one thing because it's a landslide victory. And there's something that forces you to think not in a mathematical construct way, but again about the empathy and about the aesthetics of the things. Or Seize the Power would have been the one, but that's not coming out because Inside the Box folded. I assume you heard about that.
Oh, I did, yes.
But yeah, that's a game about bigotry and discrimination, which is, about I would say it's a family game if the parents are ready to have difficult conversations with their kids about the bigotry in the world and why. Yeah, it's kind of that's I don't know. It's weird because Monopoly. I mean, not Monopoly. The Landlord's game was in theory a beautiful thing where McGee is saying, "Hey, George's tax, where the only thing we tax are these, and you shouldn't be taxed on doing your actual labor. That should be for yourself. But if you're making profits off the land, then that should be everyone. So you should be taxed off the land, and that should be the one thing that's really heavily taxed." And presenting two rules. But I think the reason that that failed and why I think the Quakers introduced the set collection and why it became this almost antithetical to what it was meant to be is because it wasn't fun. I mean, that sounds really harsh, but
No, yeah.
like the original Landlords game was worse from a enjoyment factor than the tweaks that the Quakers made in between it being re-released as Monopoly. And I think that it's a difficult thing to straddle where you want to share something with the world, you want to make a political statement, and I think it's really valuable because games can do this. And whether you look at Freedom, the Underground Railroads, but like Spirits Island does it in a really interesting, subtle way. And I love what you said about, Joey games, where you're doing it in an almost subconscious way, where it's not hammering it over the head. There's nothing about really colonialism or anything there, or things being wiped out. But it's like all about, hey, let's appreciate what's going on a little bit. And it's kind of the trappings of a theme, but that still seeps into our subconscious. I mean, I don't know if you think I'm selling your stuff short. I hope I'm not.
No. That describes it well. And yeah, the whole history of Monopoly is fascinating in terms of what actually turned out to be the more fun game.
Mm-mm.
And it's a shame, like it's something I keep learning and getting really disappointed at, that two of the best metaphors to make a fun game are profit and conquest. Like they're two metaphors that are terrible things usually in real life, but are quite easy to make fun games out of, which is really
Problematic.
strange and problematic. Yeah. Whereas making a game, like sharing, is a great thing to do in real life, but it's hard to make a fun game around.
Have you played Gift of Tulips?
I have not played that yet, but I would really like to. I have played.
It is. I mean, I know you don't like learning games on Board Game Arena, but it is available on Board Game Arena, which does at least make it available to get a sense of what the game's about. And there is a lovely points thing where you're incentivized to give things to other people. And it's, I mean, Lanterns from Christopher Chung, I believe, does also touch upon that with, okay, everyone's getting something based on your perspective of how you place these tiles down, but you're still trying to, but even then, in all of these games, you're not really genuinely sharing. You're kind of trying to improve their lot as little as you can while still getting the points. And so it's this, as soon as you gamify sharing, it's kind of like, hey, we're encouraging people to share, but only when it's kind of good for you, which is maybe a messed up message to send to people to internalize.
Yeah, so one of the launch games from Joey is called Pass the Party Food. And it was kind of this problem where I was trying to make a game about sharing party food. And the first version of it turned out to be one of the most cutthroat games I'd ever made, because you're forced to share, but as you just said, your optimal move is to do the worst possible share. And somehow that feels even meaner than just taking something from someone, because you're kind of giving them something to hurt them, And so it has this extra element of almost being like sly. Anyway, turned it into a co-op, and it is a co-op game now. And it is way easier to do sharing well in a co-op because you want everybody to benefit. But it was a hard game to design. I mean, it's super simple.
I feel like there's something really lovely in a co-op game, and there's the scoring the lowest isn't something that's been explored sufficiently, I don't think. Like, I would love there to be more co-op games where everyone's doing their own thing and it's just okay. The person who scores the lowest, that is the group's score. And so you're trying to, it does have the problem that people are then like, okay, what's a good score? And a lot of people just don't like score-based things, because My Game Couple, the worst reviews are, hey, this is really easy to win. And then the only point of it is if you try for a higher score, and I don't like high score games. And so it's like, don't think I can really help you there. But yeah, or it could be something where you need to be within a range of each other. That I don't know if that's really been explored either, because in My Game Couple, players need to be identical. But if it were, I mean, it needs to be low granularity enough, and you need to have enough opportunity to change your score in slightly different ways to do that. But maybe for higher player counts, it would be like you need to be within 2 points of each other. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I kind of explored it a bit when I was designing Past the Party Food, because what I ended up with in that game is you're all just scoring points for yourself. You're set collecting and trying to score points on the scoreboard. However, there's also essentially an AI player scoring points, who is a dog who's grabbing food off the party table. And so they're also on the scoreboard, and you have to all get to the end of the scoreboard before the dog catches anyone. So you're all scoring points for yourself, but you're all trying to make sure you're never outscored by the AI. So whoever's coming in last, so that photo there, you can see the dog on the scoreboard. Ziggy's chasing the other players. So if someone's coming in last, you're going to give them all the good stuff, because you want them to get ahead of the dog. So that was kind of my way of doing what you just said about it's almost lowest score wins, but it's like don't fall too far behind and help whoever's losing. But I think you're right that using score in a co-op game, like most co-op games, are just instant win or instant lose. And I think there's a lot of unexplored space there with using scoring in a co-op.
It's weird, because I know there's some people who are very vocal about hating high score games. And that's actually my question to everyone. Like, how do you feel about high score? Well, I feel like they're probably, if I should do like just a survey or something on Twitter. But when we look at video games, there's such a rich history with like Tetris and Asteroids or Space Invaders that people love this. And I don't think it's just because other things didn't exist. I mean, sure, high scores have gone like out of fashion. There was a whole time during the, I think, Super Nintendo 16-bit era where there were high scores, but no one really paid attention to them until they were removed entirely from the code. But there's something like threes, like all sorts of mobile games that are still about, hey, let's just get the high score, and there's a joy in chasing that. And so what is it that turns off people so much about the high score? I'm not really sure, because of, again, just one, works really well. And when a bunch of us got like the perfect high score recently, we're like, someone said, oh, this is, I'm sure they were joking. They said, oh, this is almost on a par with my wedding day.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Because, I grew up playing earlier home video games where you couldn't save. I think as soon as saving game states came in, games changed forever, because it's not just about getting your high score or getting as far as you can in the game. Yeah, you can just keep progressing. So the game has to offer other things if you can save. But no, I agree. I think it's interesting that I guess players are used to getting that victory moment at the end of a game. Either we won or we lost, I won or you won. And finishing a game and getting 12 out of 13, very good. For whatever reason, it doesn't create the same kind of moment of closure. Yeah. But I agree with you. I think high scores can be a really fun thing.
Do we need to move to more mission-based stuff? I mean, obviously, the Crew is like the Kennerspiel des Jahres winner, and it's a great game, but it really popularized, mission-based, campaign-based co-ops. But, there were stuff before. I mean, two-player Codenames Duet. I don't know if you've played that, where, at this point it says, okay, you get this many times that you can be wrong, and there's there's slightly different qualities, but maybe there is not quite enough variance in there to make it feel like a truly different thing. But maybe people are hungry for more variance than they used to be, and maybe that's the key differentiator. Like Magic Maze, I think that, again, the idea of that is that you progress through all these levels, and people like myself, when I played one, it's my slight downside with that is, as a real-time game, you need to be all very much on the same level, or you'll start getting frustrated with each other, which I understand is part of the joy of the game, but I think it can lead to slightly bad feelings. But that aside, I think there's something wonderful about, let's introduce more stuff along the way. It both teaches you the game, and you can say, hey, if you are really familiar with this type of game, start on level 10. I mean, I'm slightly tooting my own horn because, like, Kirsten Lunde designed Questable for the L deck, which is shaping up to be my favorite game for the deck, and that's a mission-based thing. But yeah, then it makes me wonder, if you were trying to make a game about sharing, should it be that, okay, you need to share differently so that you get more of a sense of completion, of satisfaction? And hello, Nicholas Straccio, who says, I caught the stream a bit late today, but it's been delightful listening to your insights. I'm looking forward to listening back to the beginning later. Great themes all around. Thank you very much. And I did say I was wrapping up, but this wrap is ridiculously slow. So over to you, Walter Up, so you can share Button if you want to. I sought permission from Josie, who I didn't need to seek permission from. She's not the boss of me, but I just said, hey, can I take the day off tomorrow? And she said, yes. So I'm going to be showering and heading out in a wee bit, and going to an lunchtime, early evening party. And then I'll probably, it'll involve just cycling there, enjoying my time with a bunch of other adult humans, and then cycling back. And I'm going to try to, after this, stay away from the internet for the rest of the day if I can. It feels good to have one day where at least half the day I stay away from the internet and stay away from designing games, even if I want to. So I'm going to maybe do a bit of tidying or read a book tonight. I'll see how that goes. How about yourself?
Well, I unfortunately have got 2 more Zoom meetings tonight. So it's often...
Are you able to share anything that's going on?
Actually, it's really just businessy stuff. It's nothing too exciting. But with my time zone, if I want to speak to North America, often quite late at night works well. So a couple of business Zoom meetings, and then I'll pop into bed.
Well, I hope that all goes well and you're very productive. And to everyone out there, if there's anything you want to share, something you want to do, something you have to do, please share. I promise I care. And now, as always, I'm going to recap and wrap up before we finish up. We started talking about terrible songs and my terrible songs, and how they're like a first edition, and be willing to share your terrible stuff with the world, because only you get better doing that way. We talked about Sushi Go being this phenomenal success, going almost to 2 million. We talked about having this separation from that sales number and aspiring to make something that reaches beyond our lifetime. Engaging with people, engaging with all the creative things around us, books, games, movies, and being in part of a band, talking about being less into reading, or for myself, being a bit discouraged from art when we went to school, like the educational system not being ideal. We talked about being sensitive children. We talked about fake artists in New York, that idea of social deduction being a little bit awkward. So when you've got an activity around it, whether that's drawing or posing and dancing, or whether it's trivia, then that kind of distracts you from the slightly uncomfortable bit, but then that comes to a lovely blend. For snakes, we talked about, asking questions is quite intimidating and spiteful. We talked about auction games for a while, and moving away from what the original inspiration might have been. We talked about reasons, whether it's being commercially viable, sparking joy, communicating something, the self-validation, adding to the medium, intellectual curiosity, or just making something that you wanted to make for yourself to buy. Because, I mean, this sounds like a terrible reason, but genuinely, if you don't have that much money to buy new games, hey, you can get a deck of playing cards, and maybe you don't like trick-taking games, but you can design a deck builder using traditional playing cards and make something for yourself, maybe. We talked about tennis coming out from Eagle Griffin, archaeology, like people still loving it, and it being this niche thing, like how sales don't reflect the whole picture and how we can get too focused on the numbers. About your day being distributed between Joey and this all business hard-nosed stuff potentially, and the freelance design, which is maybe being a bit more joyful and creative, ironically, you could say. And we talked about struggling with self-employment, starting work maybe 10:30, but then also doing work after dinner, like struggling, like which I do as well, like trying to carve out time to say this is not design, and trying to actively find other hobbies to say I am going to go away and spend this time doing something totally unrelated to board games. And we talked about podcasts, the metagamers, Converse shoes, wanting to fly like a pigeon, being inspired by Seven Wonders and Fairy Tale, played Sushi Go. On Board Game Arena, we talked about what that means, having your games on Board Game Arena, the table presence, how it gets lost, the hand-holding, the balance between hand-holding and giving strategy versus people who don't want that. We talked about games keep getting better, and you hope to have a positive influence on the culture of Australia, changing the conversation around that, it sounded like. We talked about how you feel like you're a good designer at this point, and you want to keep using that skill and keep making stuff. We talked about movies and books. You feel like the best movies and the best books have already been made. The best games yet to be made. We talked about compliments, and we talked about how sharing can be a really horrible thing in a competitive game. And maybe it can't be really done outside of a truly cooperative experience. But we had a lovely chat. And is there anything else you want to say at this point about all of that?
We did cover a lot of ground. No, just thanks for having me. It's refreshing to just have a very casual, unstructured chat about games. So yeah, thanks for having me on. And I think there's some good quotes in that last 2 hours that people could pull out. I think we both said some really interesting things we probably didn't plan on saying, but it's been fun.
It was an absolute joy. And to everyone out there, if you felt like this was useful, obviously share, spread the word. I want to say thank you very much, everyone, to the folk watching, and also most importantly, thank you, Phil, for being here. Dr. Flimflam Esquire says, these chats are fantastic, thank you. And Nordlick says, this has been interesting. Well, I'm very glad that you feel that way, and thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your time with us. If you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bez in all of the places. And tomorrow I'm going to have a debrief, well, a look back on Daisini, and I might get a bit emotional because, I'm moving away, and so it's going to be my last ever, it was my last ever Daisini, and it's like every convention that I go to, except for UK Games Expo probably, I'm being like, yeah, this is going to be the last time that I go there, because, when I emigrate to Thailand, it will be a bit too far. And then Wednesday, I'll be talking to Alan Paul about automatic resource growth, a mechanism in games. And Thursday, I'm chatting to Kirsten Lunda. If you want to check out Phil Phil Walker Harding, where would you like to be found?
Probably the best place is just my website, philwalkerharding.com, which has information about my games and designer notes and a form if you want to contact me. And I'm also on Instagram a little bit and Twitter a little bit, but my website's probably the best place.
And once more, thank you very much. I think we've basically shared all we can, and the only thing left to say, as always, is lots of love to you all. And for now, bye, 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 bye. This is Goodbye Song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. Now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is Goodbye Song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye, everyone.